Hello, my name's Alice,
And I'm Maggie.
and we're here today with Roy and David from the Fee Justice Now campaign.
Let's get started. What are the main aims of the campaign?
So this campaign, the main priority is getting fee justice for the class of COVID for this year, because this year's educational experience has been massively impacted by the pandemic, and the universities and government are just refusing to talk about it. We're going to do that through pushing the university, government, and different government agencies to kind of step in on behalf of students and demand fee justice. We also think that the whole pandemic situation has just proven all the inadequacies of the fees model for funding higher education. It's proven that fees don't work for students because they leave students out of pocket. They also don't work for universities because they leave universities at massive risk of having to pay refunds that they just can't afford. So we're hoping that this campaign and any successes that we have with the campaign that we're working with other SUs on will lead to a real conversation about the inadequacies of the fees model for funding higher education.
And so are there any other universities that are sort of joining in with the campaign, or is this kind of just a Bristol thing?
To my knowledge, there's a student fees action that's being run in LSE, if I'm not wrong. And myself, in my capacity as international students officer, I've been in contact with 17 other Russell Group international students officers, and we've kind of regularly been meeting, as well as now sending our letter to the chair of the Russell Group and also putting forward a petition to the petitions committee. So I think tuition fee compensation, tuition fee justice is definitely something that's on the mind of many students and many students' unions across the country.
And so what are the biggest obstacles that you face in trying to achieve the aims of the campaign?
So I think the biggest obstacle is that universities and government don't want to act on this measure. And students, currently, there is an imbalance of power between students and universities and government. All the power is in the hands of universities and government to silence students, to ignore students, and to just kind of buy students off on all these different apparatus and organizations that most students don't really understand. And that is going to be the main driving force behind what we're asking students to do for the campaign. It's about taking that power back, making sure that students have the capacity to hold universities and the government to account, and breaking down this apathy that exists at the within universities and government towards giving students fee justice, because ultimately they don't want to do it. Universities don't want to do it because they're worried about their own finances. Government don't want to do it because it's not politically expedient for them to do, even though it's the right thing for them to do. So we're looking at strategies which bring that power back to students, which government and universities can't ignore, and which force them to act. So that's using organizations like the Office for the Independent Adjudicator, which is the student regulatory body, the Competition and Markets Authority, as well as more conventional and also unconventional forms of direct action.
And so what current aid, financial aid, can students access at the moment?
So there's quite a few pieces of financial aid that students can access, particularly with everything that's happened in the pandemic. So there's the normal hardship fund that the university has. This is for all home students who are experiencing financial hardship. There's the International Hardship Fund, which is a bit of a smaller pot of money and kind of caters to very specific instances where international students find themselves in distress financially. There's which is what I'd like to call as the biggest and the best fund right now, is the COVID Impact Fund. So the money that the university received from the government funding that came through, a lot of that went into that fund, and all students can access this with home and international, whether you be undergraduate or postgraduate, taught or research. And this is a really substantial amount of money. And then now there's other smaller funds, I think there's a fund for the School of Social Sciences or the School of Life Sciences, if I'm not wrong. So all in all, there's quite a few different avenues to get funding for students.
What do you think of the chances of the campaign success?
Both the fact that the university senior management team seem to be quite sympathetic and actually understand the plight of students, but also specifically the need for a campaign like this at this time right now. I am feeling like we could get a good result for students, but I feel like out of all the asks that we're putting forward, out of all the machinery that we'll be using to kind of really mobilize students and get some serious support behind the campaign, I'm hoping that at least one or two really decent like results will come out of it for all the students.
Yeah, so you guys mentioned in your statement on the student union website that you wanted to avoid sort of mass redundancies and a diminished student experience. So could you just explain how you're like planning to get around that?
Yeah, so at the heart of our campaign is that this is not a campaign against staff at the university. We recognise that these frontline staff have put in an enormous amount of effort into moving their teaching online or helping students with that transition, and it's not their fault and they shouldn't be paying the price for what has happened this year. So we want to make sure that like it doesn't fall on the university to offer blanket refunds, blanket compensation to all students, because ultimately that's not something the university can afford to do without that detrimental impact to the student experience in the long run. This needs to happen with the support of government, otherwise we're going to see a massive dent to the higher education sector if like students are successful in claiming refunds.
So you mentioned like a blanket reimbursement. So do you think that sort of different courses and different students deserve more or less reimbursement? So like, for example, theatre students have had more disruption than maybe other courses. So how would you judge that?
So this is a question that we actually toiled with quite a bit in our kind of deliberation of deciding what's the appropriate amount to be going for all students, to make all students feel as if they're really getting back something. In the end, what we ended up doing was that the letter that all the international students officers alongside myself, the letter that we sent to the chair of the Russell Group actually stated an explicit amount of 30%. And this was kind of taking into account the general losses that all students would be facing across different faculties, across different courses, across different universities, really. So we felt that given that specific amount, because what that amount aimed to achieve was give students an amount high enough where they feel they're getting something back, but not low enough that it's like it's piecemeal or it feels like it's just doing something for the sake of doing it. So we felt that 30% across the board for all our students in Bristol would again be a really good ask, and that's why for all courses that's the amount that we'll be asking for.
Like at the heart of the campaign, there is this idea that education has been disrupted, the educational experience has been impacted for all students, and what the government and universities want students to do is really compartmentalize their grievances into individual courses.
How many students have you sort of gotten involved so far, and how are you planning to get more involved?
So far we've gotten hundreds of students involved in our different actions across that we've released this week. It's early days in the campaign and we're hoping to really grow that number.
Okay, well, thank you so much for meeting with us today, guys.